See, she's telepathic, call it black girl magic. Yeah, she scares the government, deja vu a tough man. We go missing by the hundreds. The camera loves us, Oscar doesn't. They want us in the kitchen, kill our sons with lynchings. We get loud about it, oh now we're the bitches. Look at what they did to my sister. Last century, last week. They put her body in a jar and forget her. They love how we repeat. Look at what they did to my sister. Last century, last week. They make her hate her own skin, treat her like a sin. But what they don't understand, but what they don't understand is, but what they don't understand, see what they don't understand. See, she's telepathic, call it black girl magic. Yeah, she scares the government, deja vu a tough man. And she don't give up. Yeah, she don't give up. She don't give up. No, she don't give up. Rosa was a freedom fighter and she taught us how to fight. Ella was a freedom fighter and she taught us how to fight. Audrey was a freedom fighter and she taught us how to fight. Angela was a freedom fighter and she taught us how to fight. Sojourner was a freedom fighter and she taught us how to fight. Asata was a freedom fighter and she taught us how to fight. Rosa was a freedom fighter and she taught us how to fight. Ella was a freedom fighter and she taught us how to fight. See, she's telepathic, call it black girl magic. Yeah, she scares the government, deja vu a tough man. But what they don't understand, but what they don't understand is, but what they don't understand, see what they don't understand. She don't give up. Yeah, she don't give up. She don't give up. No, she don't give up.
It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. It is our duty to win. We must love each other and support each other. We must love each other and support each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains. We have nothing to lose but our chains.
Good evening. Okay. We're going to have to do better than that. It's almost spring. It's almost Friday. And we have honored guests, including all of you, right? So good evening. My name is Dr. LaConte Dill, and I'm an assistant professor here in the School of Public Health in the Department of Community Health Sciences. I also have the pleasure of being the faculty liaison for the Student Council. We have a lot of family here at Downstate Medical Center, so I don't need to go over history, but I just want to remind everyone that we have a real commitment to both urban and immigrant health. And though we have the unique privilege of working locally in Brooklyn and throughout New York City, we also have a global reach, a global health lens for our work. Our students tend to remind us as faculty that the personal is political. And some of you know that that adage comes from the feminist movement. And so as much as we focus on public health in our school, we also are reminded that our personal health influences our commitments to public health. We are doing this event as part of National Public Health Week, which officially was last week across the country, but we were on spring break. So we are celebrating this week. And you're gonna hear about some of the activities that went on this week and will culminate this evening. But I want to remind you that all of the activities, including this one, were all student planned and student led. So without further ado, I want the student council members to stand up or wave your hands. Some of them are working around the room. Michelle. And now I want to introduce the School Public Health Student Council Vice President, Michelle Davis, who will introduce our speakers and guests.
Okay, well, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, to just really welcome a truly remarkable guest to Downstate. National Public Health Week, which is part of the inspiration for this event, is a time for public health professionals to elevate some of the most important conversations in our field. And we've had a lot of conversations this week. With Dr. LaConte Dill's help, we talked about the importance of centering our wellness as a necessity to continue fueling our work in public health and to continue our advocacy efforts that sometimes might drain us. We learned about ways to simplify our messages. After all, there are so many issues that fall under the purview of public health, and often half the battle is bringing these messages to those who would benefit from receiving them. We also talked about the opioid crisis, which continues to grow and continues to prompt questions about how our society has confronted addiction historically and how we can learn, evolve, and shape a better response. Tonight, we are joined by Erica Hudgens, who has been doing public health because it really functions as a verb for a long time. Her actions, her words, her legacy are all underpinned by her persistence to inspire growth. Growth that transforms society into a more just place for everyone. Growth that brings resources where they are scarce. Growth that changes minds and hearts to see solutions where they seem out of grasp. But before we hear from Erica, we will hear a few words from a young woman who grew up in this neighborhood and has similarly been busy inspiring growth. We'll hear from Nana Samake, who is a peer facilitator for CAVI and a youth activist at the Brooklyn Community Foundation. She is a 18-year-old freshman at the College of Staten Island, majoring in biology. Nana was born and raised in Brooklyn, and she is passionate about social justice and aspires to be a reconstructive surgeon with the goals of reconstructing her community for the better. So please join us in welcoming Nana Samake.
Hello, everyone. My name. Hello. Allow me to introduce Erica Hudgens, a Black Panther Party member, political prisoner, poet, and human rights advocate. Brings a legacy of spiritual practice and social justice activism to her work. For 38 years, Erica has lectured and facilitated groups throughout the United States. She opens minds and hearts to an expanded view of humanity by turning participants to their family and work relationships. She values nonverbal communication and observes the room insightfully. Erica has supported thousands of people in dialogue about the importance of human rights, whole child education, family reunification, diversity and inclusion in the workplace, and restorative practices as a tool for social change. As a speaker and facilitator, Erica intentionally invites the voices of people who are underrepresented into conversation. She holds a compassionate space for awareness and accountability. Erica Huggins.
Okay, I tried. Okay, so thank you so much for having me here. I just left Brooklyn College, and the day before, I was at Lehman and a community center. And tomorrow, I'm at Hostos and Columbia. And then I fly home on Saturday. And whew, I have enjoyed every moment. And in every place that I have been, people have wanted to talk about self-care. Not just here, under the auspices of the School of Public Health, but everywhere. And we'll talk more about this because we're all human. And probably in those few seconds when we were quiet, it was the first time today that you'd actually taken some breaths. We live in a fast-paced world. So arrowing back, I want to thank a few people for inviting me here. I want to thank Kirsten Weisbeck for being on the phone with me and helping to plan all the different things that have to happen in order for a person to show up here. You know what I mean. And I want to thank LaConte Dill for being such an advocate, I'm assuming a mentor, and all kinds of other things. I feel it in your presence when I first felt it in your presence when I first met you. And I want to thank you, Nana, for introducing me, but more importantly, for sitting with me in the little room down there and telling me about your life and your dreams. And I just hope that you live the life of your dreams. And don't let anything barrier you. Nothing. Keep your dream right here. And I say that to anybody in this room who has a dream that somebody has things to say about, or nothing to say about it. You can be your own best friend if you don't feel you're getting it externally. Do you know what I mean? We're here to talk about self-care. We'll get there in a minute. But one of the first things I want to say is the evening or the afternoon will be start with 2 film clips. And after each film clip, we're going to stop and talk for a little while. I might ask you to talk to that person next to you. I know you don't know that person, but you can ask them their name and tell them yours. So I also want to thank all of the students and faculty of this school, SUNY Downstate. I'd never known about it before until my friends Mary Phillips and Robin Spencer at Professors at Lehman told me about it. They made this whole week happen for me, campus hopping. So thank you to people I don't have the name for. If you had anything to do with me being here, thank you so much. I'm grateful. So I work, in addition to traveling and speaking, I work with an organization called World Trust. And World develops films that go out into community so that people can have conversations, I want to say, that matter. There's so many things we're afraid to talk about. And we have all kinds of nice terms to make them palatable for some of us. But their films are all so that we can have conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in particular, racial equity. And also how it coincides with gender equity. So I travel with World Trust Films. We're not going to see a whole film this evening. We don't have time. I travel with them, and in between the parts of the films, we have conversations that some of us always have and that some of us have never had before. You might find that when you watch the film clip of the newest one of World Trust Films, that it will spark ideas and associations. It may trigger emotion or questions or confusion or anger. That's fine. We're all human. And so if we are watching or being engaged with something and we have feelings, that's normal. What we do with the feelings is what we'll end up talking about. So the first film clip is from the newest film, and it's called Healing Justice. And I want to say it's about a coat. That's all I'm going to tell you. This film, Healing Justice, is all about using restorative practices to heal harm. And how many of you are familiar with the concept of restorative justice? A few. You can certainly read about it. You can go to the World Trust website, world-trust.org, and watch the trailer for this film. It is beautiful. And I am a person who entered a restorative justice dialogue. If someone reminds me, I can tell you something about that. So I do know that it does help the person who has harmed and the persons who received that harm. If we could apply that to our system of mass incarceration, if we could have restorative practices in certainly in every prison or jail, or like in California, in every public school, we would be reducing harm. Jails and prisons don't reduce harm. They create more. So we're going to watch this film clip now. It's just a few minutes long, and then we'll talk about it. And I'll come back. Thank you.
Restorative justice is repairing the harm, bringing together communities.
Can we make it louder?
Restorative justice is repairing the harm, bringing together communities to hold people accountable and to create space where justice is brought to the forefront. In restorative justice, no one is punished. It's something happens and you want to know who's involved, but you don't look at rules that were broken. You just look at the harm that was caused and then how do we make it right, opposed to who should be punished. Restorative justice is important because we live in a society where we assume we're going to be punished for everything. Anything we do wrong, we're judged and we look to be punished. I believe that if we start to look at why something happened and how we can be held accountable for it, we will less likely, we would probably not repeat that again. Everything is happening so fast with you did wrong, you did bad, so you must be punished.
So, what did you notice about what she said? What stayed with you? She said some of the same things I said, and I thought this was a longer clip which goes into a story. But turn to the person or persons next to you and talk about what she said, and talk about the punitive justice, which has created mass incarceration, which, by the way, statistically is not only predominantly the incarceration of black and brown men and women, but the fastest growing population of people incarcerated are black and brown women. The men have been overly incarcerated for decades. So what about the children? What about the harm caused to the entire family? Who is working with the children? What do our schools do to talk about that trauma? And in public health, and I'm a lay person to public health. I'm not a student of public health, but I do know that trauma is part of what you're handling all of the time. I could tell you so many stories just from today. The trauma of being stalked by undercover policemen at Brooklyn College because you are Muslim. That is beyond heartbreaking. By a person who you think is your friend. So what if that undercover police person was in a circle with the women harmed and they were able to talk about it? There's a myth that people are in prison because they belong there, because they've created violent crimes. But statistics also show that that percentage is very small. As someone said to me today, a lot of people are incarcerated for growing plants. I thought that was adorable. For selling plants. Do you get what I'm saying? Hello? Okay. So turn to someone next to you and talk about what Pamela said about restorative justice. Not only what she said, but how she said it as a means for healing. Maybe the School of Public Health at SUNY Downstate will, if it doesn't already have restorative practices in its school, could do so. It's not complicated. It's accountability, responsibility, and if possible, asking another for their forgiveness. Okay, so just turn to people, share your name. It's not okay not to talk to anybody or look at your phone. So talk to somebody. Thank you. Hi. Hello. I'm Erica. You can come sit closer. Oh, okay. All right. What's your name? Hi, how are you? My name is Erica. What's your name? Ashley. Okay. Okay, thank you. We watched a short film clip about restorative practices, restorative justice, and then I don't know if were you here? Oh, okay. So that's okay. So people are just talking with each other about what they saw, and so you'll hear. Can you sit closer though, because we're going to engage together as a large group soon. Can you come up front? Excuse me. Okay, you can conclude your conversations for now. Well, you all had a few things to talk about, huh? So, yes, we do need to talk more, because the more we talk, the more we can talk. Welcome. Please come and have a seat anywhere. And we're sitting as close to the front as we can, so we're more cozy. All right. So when you heard Pamela speaking on the film clip, some people didn't see it because they were coming from class or from roads and construction or trains that don't work. So, what do you want to say about it? Somebody can just speak. And this evening would be good if you spoke. Okay, yes. Hi. Can you pass this mic to people? No, it's not you.
Hi, it reminded me of the humanization of it. I feel like when trauma happens, people become decentered, and going back to the center of like what went wrong instead of this extreme like left or right toss thing. It also reminded me of time and how restorative to me that relates to time. Coming from more of a dance background, so when I think of restorative, I think of restorative yoga, think of taking the time to unpack what happened. Also, when trauma happens, how do you react to that? Do you, I don't know, for different things, not necessarily the body, but like, yeah.
We're both nurses, and I thought of the root cause analysis. Before it was something happened and we punished the nurse. Now we look at the system, we look at what could have been done, and it becomes a learning lesson. And I was just telling her, when we have the root cause analysis, we not only bring the person involved, but others who are not involved, so they learn from this. So when they leave that area, there's some growth that has taken place in everyone, including the person that was involved in it.
Raise your hand if you want to say something about the film clip or about something you heard that someone said to you. You don't have to say what you said. With the permission of that person, you can say what you heard.
So it reminded me of the missed opportunity for the young brother who died, Khalif, who was jailed 3 years for allegedly stealing a backpack. He was finally released, and I saw him speak a couple of times, and he really could have used restoration because he ended up committing suicide. So you all remember that story? Yeah. And so that's why everything is happening at Rikers Island. So I said, and I saw in that boy's face that he was traumatized and he needed to be restored. And it really didn't happen for him. He didn't really give himself a chance, and I'm not sure who was there. But as a result of his death, it has changed the way they operate Rikers Island, and it will probably close in the next couple of years.
Thank you so much for saying that. and in the way that you said it. How many people here have been on the inside of a prison, not as a visitor? It is not what you think it is. And why we put people there, I don't understand from my own lived experience. I don't know any benefit. I made it beneficial to myself because I was arrested for my political beliefs. I made it my business because I was isolated and then in solitary confinement for having views that weren't what the government wanted at the time. I'm measuring what I say. That I knew I couldn't live like that. In isolation, not allowed to talk to any of the other women, with no way to get exercise. I knew I had to do that for myself, and I also knew I had to do something to take care of my mind. I had just lost my husband 3 months before that, due to the FBI's counterintelligence program. If you don't know what it was, I can tell you about it later. But to continue on, whatever the cause of his death would have been, that was not what I expected. My daughter was 3 weeks old, and she was taken from me because babies don't live in prisons. So I'm a 21-year-old single mom now and widow with a heart like shattered glass. I had to not care what they were blaming me for. But I did go over any minor or bigger harm I'd ever done in my entire life while I was in a place where I was the only one I could talk to. But the biggest thing that I did that I'm grateful to myself for is that I taught myself to meditate. And the trauma of all of it began to heal. No, I'm not saying you should meditate. That's not my point. I'm telling you that it dawned on me, unlike the young man you were just talking about, that I was not going to go out like that. But if we would offer this, if this was a part of the way we are with human beings, our world, our cities, our states, even the carceral sites would be different. And there are places that have restorative justice programs, like San Quentin. And if you're interested later, I can tell you about sitting in circles with men in blue. Most remarkable, inspiring, uplifting circles I've ever been in my life. So the way we think of punishment trickles down. It's not just for somebody once they're arrested. It starts in our schools with detention, which children have all kinds of nicknames for. The dungeon, the jail, and it's always in some dark place in a basement. So it's preparing young people for what? So when I was listening to Pamela in the clip just now, I was thinking about harm. And harm is not only for a person who's arrested for something or for a student in a classroom who's gotten in a fight. We are in a country where there is multi-generational historical harm that we don't know how to talk about. Did any of you talk about that? Did that come up in any of the conversations? Yes, you're saying? She has a mic. She's right back there. No, raise your hand so I'm looking at, okay. I was talking to her, I wasn't trying to put you on point. Raise your hand so she can see.
Actually, a lot of what you just spoke about, we actually talked about in terms of, I work in a school, I do violence intervention at a school right in this neighborhood. And we deal with a lot of young people who come in. There's a lot of generational trauma that they're dealing with. Parents, some of them don't have their fathers in the house or the parents in the house. They are either incarcerated or dead. I mean, the generational trauma goes back years, slavery and different things that we are all dealing with. We live in a society that we all experience trauma in different ways. And then they come to school, which is supposed to be a safe haven for them, and then they have to, first of all, go through metal detectives in this school, right? That's already something that's traumatizing, treating you as a criminal.
What level school?
It's high school. You know, and then they are dealing with the community, they're dealing with probably death of friends who are incarcerated. Like yesterday, one of my students actually was arrested in the school, right? Treated. I mean, I don't know what he did. I'm not, you know, but the point is just the way that that was handled was not something that was good for, first of all, it's just a lot. And then restorative practices, I think, is something that is needed in these schools because they have to deal with this trauma. And as you were saying, it's time to break that school to prison pipeline, that you suspend these young people and they're not healing, you know, and you're not trying to find out why they're doing what they're doing. You just want to punish them for doing it. And I think that's doing them a very, very, very big disservice because they get suspended. That's on their record forever, you know, and that just leads to the downfall of this person. And it's just
Thank you.
Such a negative, you know, it's just terrible. So
thank you.
You know, so it starts sometimes in the womb, this trauma. I mean, not sometimes, it starts in the room, this traumas. And, you know, it just keeps going, snowballs from there. So, yeah, we need healing. Everybody needs healing. We do need it.
Yes. And whenever we're talking like this, some people become uncomfortable. If you are uncomfortable for whatever reason at this time, just take a moment and breathe. Your lungs are not there by accident. Just breathe. I noticed that when you mentioned slavery, it made some people uncomfortable. Not your words, it's not you. It's just that we don't talk about that historical harm that never had any healing intervention, not a smidgen. And to believe that it doesn't have impact today isn't wakeful, it's not conscious. Because all traumatic experiences have impact on us. And as you said, it starts in the womb. As a mother, I understand what that means. And there are studies that show all of this, if you're interested in reading and researching. So now we're going to watch a second film clip. And I'm not going to give it a descriptive name. It's short as well. And we'll talk about it like we did before. You might want to choose another person to talk to this time, or talk to the same people. It's fine, whatever works for you. So we'll watch the clip and then we'll talk about it.
This work is really grounded in a philosophy that hurt people. And in order to actually heal those harms and those hurts, you have to go to the root of the hurt. And when you go to the root of the hurt, you start healing those hurts. And when you heal those hurts, you can then heal yourself and heal other people. So hurt people transforms into healed people, healing other people.
So thank you for the people who made the film clips happen. Turn to a person and ask and talk about this concept that hurt people. And then, of course, healed people help to heal people. And if you have nobody you're sitting with, please go to somebody and talk with them. And you can stay where you are and talk with the person in the back. You have the, yes.
Okay, we're going to come back together. I just want to give folks a time check. As you know, we started a little bit late. Thank you. We started a little bit late with our discussion, with our presentation, so we want to extend. As you know, we have a lot to talk about. So it's about 7 now. We're gonna go until 7:15. We know some people might have to go, get on with their evening, but if folks can stay, we have the room later. So we want to invite folks that can to continue to dialogue with us. Thank you.
So this time, what did you hear? Or what did you talk about? The room is so juicy when everybody's talking to one another. Yes, there's a microphone right behind you. First, yes, and
Yeah,
then
and
the
then I'll
woman
give it
right in front of her.
Hi.
Hi.
Over here we talked about hurt as a cycle. It doesn't always have to be. There are people who find healing through, people who are hurt who find healing by coming across someone else who is hurt with the same pain, and they manage to take this path and get out of it. But I think like we were talking about how as societies, communities find themselves stuck in a cycle because they haven't had the opportunity to experience healing and an opportunity to come out of the pain, and it can transmit through generations. And I think after a certain time, a society that's been through, years of, for example, war or pain, find that they start to forget that there might be a different way, than what they've continued to experience.
The woman speaking on the film clip is Sonia Shah, and she's been a leader in restorative justice practices all over the United States, but particularly in California where she lives and works. And one of the things that I wanted to say about it before we go further into conversation, and thank you very much, is that when I did sit in the restorative justice circles in San Quentin, and also in the federal women's prison in Northern California, what I heard over and again after people were accountable and graphically told their stories, completely accountable, completely responsible, and wanted to ask forgiveness if they knew how to find the person or the survivors. They would talk about what their childhoods were like. In San Quentin, not one of the men who shared his story had a father. And out of the 11 men in that circle, 6 of them had been sexually and physically abused. So I think that the phrase or the sentence, the transformative sentence that Sonia shared, is deep. It's multi-layered. And I just wanted to give you that piece of information. And the same is true of the women in the women's prison. Violence throughout their lives, and in the lives of the people who were their parents and their grandparents and their great-grandparents. I know that this campus has huge immigrant populations in the student population, and I just love that. And I'm always wishing that people in places of decision making would sit in circle. Can you imagine if before you went in to trash yet one more wonderful something with your decision, that you pass a talking piece and you let everybody talk about what this would really mean, this decision. But we'll get there, because human beings are incredibly good and intelligent and powerful. So the person in front of you had the mic next. And thank you for sharing that. And it's true. I'm a survivor of rape. And I know that when I talk to women who also have been harmed in that way, it's very healing all the way around. So what you just said made me want to say something else. Then in my work, I work at the health department here in New York City, and one of the things we've been looking at is the trauma of women when they give birth and the disrespect and abuse they experience from the healthcare system. Yes. And this sort of institutional racism that they're experiencing. Yes. And we've been talking about trying to have a conversation with the providers and these women who've had traumatic birth experiences. And this idea of that, it's my guess, I appreciate the hopefulness of your framework, because as angry as they are, the folks who are doing these disrespectful things, I don't know that they've had a trauma. They've been trained to work in a certain way and not necessarily see the humanity in the person next to them. So the type of trauma is how they treat someone interpersonally. It isn't physical violence. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to think how to translate this, because I know it's the same. It feels the same into the work with in a healthcare system or in a school where people are traumatizing others by treating them like non-people, or like not hearing them or disregarding them because they're a black woman or they dressed a certain way. Is the staffing primarily white? It depends across the city. So, there are hospitals that are taking on restorative practices to retrain that, to reboot that, to reset that, whatever term you want to give it. And it isn't just the staffing, it's also the doctors. I was talking about the doctors. And I wasn't, when I said staff, I was being very general, but I definitely am including the doctors.
Yes. And so it may be that the harm is both race and gender related, which is very prominent these days at every level. But also, we're trained not to talk about race, and definitely not to talk about it in relation to gender. So, what are the doctors being trained in medical school? What are the staffing of hospitals being trained? And this beautiful place has the opportunity of doing it differently. So, restorative practices work anywhere. They work in a family, a small family. So, someone else, there's someone behind you who wants to speak. Yes.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
As far as hurt people hurting people, I work with the New York City Department of Education in high school, and what I've come across a lot, and it kind of threw me off, was the fact that boys and girls, they're physical altercations.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first started working at this school, I would notice like the boys would just hit on these girls like it was okay. And I would pull them aside and I'm like, why do you think it's okay to put your hands on these girls? And the answers were, they like it. And these were the answers that I got. And then I started sitting back and I'm observing the girls literally coming for the boys physically to get a reaction. And I'm like, so when I start talking to them, and it becomes, this is what they used to seeing. You know, again, back in the home. And the boys' reaction usually generally the same thing if there was a father or, you know, used to seeing mom get beat or the sister get beat or whatever the case may be. And I'm trying to figure out how to fix. I know I can't myself just alone fix it, but in conversation, I'm like, you guys know that is not. We have deep conversations about these things, but just the idea that the boys think it's okay to put their hands on these girls, and even the girls too. You know, I hold them both accountable because I tell them all the time, you may come across, you may be playing, but come across the wrong person one day, and he really hurts you. There should be no reason why there's any kind of physical contact like that unless it's out of affection.
So it calls for school-wide shift in order to talk about it so that we get to, as Sonia said, the root of the problem. If you're raised in a home where daddy beats mommy and beats kids and the dog, then you're going to think that it's okay. And we live in a society that okays it. We live in a society that has rape culture. And if we didn't, then the way that women report and the way that courts receive the reports and the ways that we trust the woman's story or not, and the ways that people are held accountable or not, is pretty miserable. I could give you some statistics, but I don't want everybody to go out of here like, whoa, that was really heavy. So, but the thing is that restorative practices can work anywhere, and I would just suggest that you educate yourselves a little bit about, they're not complicated. You could lead a circle from what you just said. I know you could. And you probably do. But having the school or the hospital or the college or the university totally supported from the top level down, that is the deal. There's an organization in Oakland called Our Joy. It's an acronym. I love the acronym better than the name, Our Joy. Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth. I live in Oakland, California. And they are in at least 70 or 80 schools. And if you go online to Our Joy, Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth, they could talk to you about how you can do this here. They work with other schools in many other states to start this ball rolling. It is really effective. Because sometimes the boys and girls don't know why they're doing what they're doing. Some behavior has been modeled for them. Not to mention online entertainment. I put that in some big old quotes. And film and TV and music, and it goes on and on and on. So, yes, let's hear from, can we hear from a person who hasn't spoken? Somebody over here want to say something? Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Just to kind of piggyback off the last comment, I think it's also important to take that point as sometimes it's not always because there may be some type of physical altercation going on in the home that these young men and young women react this way. Sometimes it could be the lack of interaction can also lead to this type of behavior, you know. What if there's a young man at home who is not getting the affection from his mom, and therefore he is reaching out to these younger women or, you know, his peers to try and get that attention because that's the place where he's going to get it. Right, and the same with the girls, you know, maybe they're not getting this attention that they're seeking or this affection, this interaction that they're trying to get from their immediate circle, so they're doing it at school. So we need to also take things like that into consideration. I think it brings us right back to this whole point of getting down to the root of what these issues are. Once you kind of pull that individual into an office, you know, and try to find out all of the people involved, I think that's where you get down to the point of what is going on. And I think as a community, and I'm talking pretty much from my standpoint right now, as an African American woman,
I feel like we need to have more of these circles and more of these discussions within our community, because there is a point where we've been silenced and we don't talk about these things among ourselves. So I'm very grateful for this discussion right now, because this is something that I feel a lot of people in my community don't know about, or would take a little time to kind of wrap their hands around restorative justice, you know? So I'm definitely taking these points to take back home and
Right. Thank
kind
you.
of put into my different circles.
Thank you. There's a person back there who wants to speak. Yes. And please engage. I don't want to stand here with them. I could sit down and somebody, but engage. Don't be shy. Your voices are important in the world.
Good evening, everybody. I enjoy these conversations, and I'm always with the hurt people. I mean, I think we can agree that it comes across in different spectrums. Yes, because some people are seeing it at home. Yes, because some people are not seeing any love at home. I worked with Abina, the young lady who spoke earlier, and we work in this high school setting, or I worked, she still does, in this high school setting. And it was always very interesting to hear the young ladies, in our case, were referred to our program where we had a group setting and a safe space for the young ladies to talk, and they were referred because they were identified by guidance counselors or teachers as violent individuals, whether they were having verbal altercations or physical altercations, and many of them were in jeopardy of not graduating or being expelled or transferred. And it was always very interesting that we did kind of lure them with something to eat. But even when we didn't have food, once they understood what we were there, we were a safe space for them to engage and kind of let us know what was going on. Some of them, I mean, and not rightfully so, but some of them would normally, they wouldn't come to class. They would make sure that they found out what time our sessions met. They would skip over math and reading, but somehow around fourth period, they would make it to our sessions because it was important for them to engage and talk to someone about the hurt that they were experiencing. We're talking about kids who don't come to school on a regular basis, but they knew on Thursday there would be CAVI meeting and they were gonna come to school. And what kind of concerns me in such a major way is we are so focused on teaching math and reading and grammar, and I am a huge educator, I'm very invested in my children's educations, but while that is very important, if we are not giving young people or hurt people the tools to make it through the day, because how many times do you need to know about the Incan Empire versus do you need to have conflict resolution? I can't remember the last time I needed to share anything about the Roman Empire with somebody versus the last time I really need to figure out how not to respond in a certain way. And when you have just generations and thousands of young people or people in general who are hurt and broken, how that's not part of the curriculum. When we know that our children need to be or learn how to be resilient, how we don't make that a part of the program when they are clearly dying for this and not showing up to class, but showing up to a place where they can actually figure out how to navigate the course of their day and to deal with their brokenness, because they know they're hurt. They know that they're broken. It becomes very, there's a desperation and a need out there that we as a people, if I can push my children going to school and learning about all these great things I want them to learn, there should also be a passion and a push for us to learn and incorporate these tools that are going to help these young people, and not just young people, period, people in general, because they're hurt grown-ups, they're hurt senior citizens, I mean, down the gamut. You can go to church on any day and see older people hurting young people, that we've got to figure that out.
Thank you. Anybody else want to say something? The mic is going to the person back here, and then we'll bring it to you, okay?
Good evening.
Good evening.
So just to reiterate what she just stated, and I had wrote in my notes that I believe that every single last human being on the earth to some degree has some type of trauma that we're either dealing with or not aware of or affecting our behavior in some way. Trauma from my mother's trauma that I'm not, my mother's trauma, like you said, is generational. And so, and someone else in the room said a comment about it starts in the wound and then it starts at home. And I think during our first discussion, I spoke with my partner Gladys, and I said to her, it starts at home, and we're trained to expect punishment, and we're trained to be reactive to punishment for a behavior. But to some degree, we all have some type of trauma that affects our behavior. And so when someone has a traumatic experience from their childhood, from other generational whatever, that causes them to behave to me in a way, and then how able am I to not become reactive and be victimized now or hurt by their behavior, and able to stop and think, this person is dealing with, how able am I to look past what they did to me to say it's their hurt that caused them to behave that way, and then how to build restoration. And so, I mean, this is a great discussion, a think tank, and that engagement. The other young lady who said, with the lack thereof, it's not always trauma due to crime, it's trauma due to, loneliness or lack of love or attention or whatever, your mother's affection, so on and so forth. So it's just trauma and so many variables to that trauma.
Thank you very much. And can you raise your hand, because she's going to bring you the mic. Thank you for doing this. And but I want to say that if there's something else we want to talk about this evening, because this is a campus which really draws immigrant students into all the fields of healthcare and healthcare professionals, and doctors as well. Are there things that you want to talk about that we haven't touched on yet? We stayed with restorative practices because we so need them. So we'll get there as soon as we hear from the person who has the mic. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you. I grew up in East New York, Brownsville, Brooklyn. And the neighborhood kids all went to the same elementary school. So we all knew each other in the walk through and back to school, all right? But there was one bully in the neighborhood that everybody was aware of, right? I'm not going to mention his name. But he was the middle of three boys, sons, all right? And I could recognize later, when I became a physician and knew something about psychiatry, that his problem was if he beat up his kid brother, his older brother or his father beat him up, all right? So the only people he had to beat up were the people in the neighborhood. And sometimes he would get somebody else to beat us up. So he was being hurt and came out and became the pain for some of the rest of us, all right? And sometimes not even doing it himself, just chasing somebody else to beat somebody else up.
We live in a society that does not teach us how to handle our unbearable pain. And as you said, everybody in this room has suffered some trauma. And then there are persons who have a multiplicity of trauma because they live in a body with coinciding identities that aren't considered normal. So you've had your hand up for a while. Did you want to talk about something beyond what we're talking about now?
Yeah.
Okay.
I wanted to, we're talking about all kinds of trauma, but the trauma I'm most concerned with from my personal experience is the trauma of being lied to and of deception.
Can you explain or give an example without, without outing anybody?
No, no, no. It doesn't have to, not to out anybody here or a particular group, but growing up in grade school, and this gentleman was just talking about his experience about we all went to the same elementary school and we all knew that the same bully. With things like we just talked about slavery, we just mentioned slavery, we just talked about, we didn't talk about it yet, but segregation and how the black and brown communities have been isolated. And then we still tell this story to black and brown kids about how if they work hard, they will have access to the American dream.
That's the lie you're talking about.
Correct. And so
the myth of meritocracy.
yes. And to expand on that further, this idea that we've all been told that if we work hard and if our kids get good grades and they go to college and they graduate, that they will have access to the American dream, and they will have access to that great health care, and they will have access to make better decisions, to have access to more information, to make better decisions, better healthcare decisions. And the interesting thing is now that I've graduated, I've been out there working, and I'm not saying that the American dream is still not possible, but what I'm saying is what it takes to get there is a lot more than what we were told.
Yes, it's a myth. Because there's your great effort, and then there is access.
Right.
And I'm thinking now about this wonderful African-American man who was the first medical student at UCLA in the 1950s. I wish it was the 1850s, but it was the 1950s. And he was not allowed to attend medical school. But his grade point average and everything else about him made him a stellar student. So he sat for the 4 years undergraduate in a room the size of a closet. That closet was connected to the classroom by himself. That is not only remarkable, that is one sad story about our country. So he had no access. He had made all the effort. He was beyond brilliant, and yet. So I do hope that for you and your peers, that does not remain to be the barrier to you living the life of your dreams. Really, I really mean that, because nothing about our skin color, gender, sexual orientation, ability, citizenship status, or class should barrier us from rights that are human. So thank you.
I wanted to say one more thing in response to that.
Yes. And then I see that you have your hand up, okay?
The one last thing I would say in addition to that is that it hurts more when you talk about that student who was trying to get into medical school, and we have people today who have a tendency to complain, or not complain, but draw attention to affirmative action policies and say that, well, there's all of a sudden reverse racism without acknowledging the injustices that happened before. I think that's another.
It's a form of historical amnesia. Some things you just have to rename them for yourself so that they don't stick to your heart and take up too much cognitive space. And by the way, statistics show that affirmative action was of the best benefit, the greatest benefit to white women, not to people of color. And if you don't, just check me out if you think I made it up. I wish I had made it up. But it was a good beginning for trying to create an equitable playing field. Yes.
Yes, well, thank you. I mean, this discussion has been very powerful. I want to comment on the challenge that you've given us as a medical campus, because originally we were trained as doctors or nurses, that we were superior and we would have doctor's orders, do this and that. Now the sort of modern thing is, I will be very nice to you and you will do what I say. And that we get very angry at patients who don't show up,
which we are you talking about?
I'm talking as health professionals who don't follow our directions, who don't
I
do
don't know
this
that
and-
all.
No, I'm just saying that this is a part of the culture of a academic medical center, partially, that I'm being nice. What the heck is going on with these people, you know? And we have to start looking at the way we're training ourselves, but also our students, so that we become sensitive to the traumas of our patients, because the patients that are most disliked, I think, by physicians are the ones that talk back to them, and, you know, or stomp out of the room and that kind of thing. And we just have to learn. We're like so naive about what's going on with that, to be able to have a partnership in terms of helping people heal their sort of physical things. So again, I think we're very lucky to have the challenge that you've brought to us tonight to think about.
Thank you. So we added time on. We were supposed to end at 7:30, and I think that it was 5 to 7:30, right, originally. And I think we were adding on, we said 7:15, my mistake. But we're going to be until 7:45 if you want to stay. That's just a few minutes. But I wanted to share something with you. Did somebody have their hand up? Okay. I just want to share something about the work I did that I don't always talk about it, but I feel compelled to talk about it here. And you reminded me, so thank you. So this is a story. So for 5 years, I worked in HIV and AIDS prevention and education in various capacities. But when I worked at Shanti Project, which was one of the leaders of the movement to stop the spread of AIDS, when I walked in, I was a woman of color with all gay white men. And first I was asked, well, how are you qualified to be here? So I'd go cry about that, and then I'd go back and I'd serve. And I was being asked to create a program for people of color and women and children because they were being dismissed. We can't serve everybody. Why do we have to serve these people? So, you know, what we call intersectionality, what we're really talking about is coinciding identities, and they're kind of like a matrix or a spider web. So being gay in that situation or lesbian in that situation wasn't good enough to reduce the harm of being racist, obviously. And so I'm going to tell you a really hilarious story. So So I was the manager for practical support volunteers, which means I trained volunteers who went into the homes or the apartments of people living with HIV and AIDS. And this is before medicine came up with better medicines so that people could live longer. So they were taking cocktails that sometimes weren't created for the people taking them. And the clinical trials weren't good for women because the clinical trials were all for men. Do you understand? So, but I'm remembering this one particular client who I just loved. His name was Chief. And Chief lived in the Tenderloin of San Francisco, Native American. And he'd been a heroin addict. And through drug use, contracted the virus. And I sent a volunteer to work with Chief, and the volunteer was a young white man, very kind person. But like you said, he had all these ideas about he was going to fix Chief. He went to visit Chief's little apartment in the Tenderloin 2-3 different times, and Chief was polite and quiet. Then he rang me on the phone, Erica. I said, yeah, Chief, how you doing? I'm good, I'm good. Got a little cat now. I said, oh, great. Got to get rid of the cat because that might give me an illness. Oh, great, Chief, so what's up? Why are you calling me? You rarely call me, Chief. He said, yeah, well, you know that little guy you send over? I'm like, yeah, I do know. I can't take care of him, Erica. I just can't. I can't continue to take care of him. And I wanted to share this story because that is what also people think they must do. Be polite with you, tell you, okay, you just shouted me out, you just demeaned me in front of whomever. You called me a bad patient, but my mother didn't train me to spew at you. And I'll never forget that conversation with Chief. And all I said to him was, Chief, you don't have to take care of anybody. Somebody's supposed to be coming there to take care of you. Let me work something out. He said, is that okay? Because he's a nice man. I just can't take care of him no more. Because the guy, I found out later, the guy was walking in and said, tell me about the Native Americans. And tell me, how did you become addicted to heroin? All he needed was a load of laundry done. Could you just do my laundry? Whereas the reverse is true. The person who has agency, as they say, would have told the guy, be quiet, just do the laundry, empty the trash, I'll see you later, I'm not feeling so good. Does this story ring a bell? Sorry.
Erica, I want to say hello. I'm a friend and classmate from Lincoln University.
Wow.
Your late husband and I used to go back to Connecticut. I'm from Stamford and he was from New Haven.
Yeah.
And I remember our days in the Black Student Union. So it's very interesting to be here and to see you here, and I work at Downstate, and also the full circle. I mean, my sister in the union is talking about meditation. I was like, whoa, it's beautiful. So I just want to say,
thank you. Did you know that I was fond of meditation then? I've always been very, very aware that there is something more to life than what we can see in your face or your body or your smile or lack of it. And so yeah, I'd always been searching for more. And there you have it. And John Huggins told me something once. He was a very, very wonderful, I want to say, feminist man. Did you understand the two words? I didn't say he was feminine. Okay. So he was very wonderful. And one day when I was having a pity party about I'm not doing enough, and you know, it's like a huge ocean of suffering, and I got a little bucket with a drop of water, and what am I going to do? I was just having a moment. And he called me over. We were sitting on a bed in Compton. And I don't know how to describe Compton to you, but you do know the Bronx. You know what Brooklyn used to be. You know all the cities in this country to some degree. And then there's all the cities and the places outside of this country where people live in poverty we cannot fathom. We can't fathom it. But he said to me, and I've never forgotten it, and he was 22, and I must have been 20. He said, Erica, sit down, just a minute. And I sat down and he said, before we can make revolution in society, we first have to make it inside our own selves. And I dried up the tears and the snot and everything, and I was like, okay, got it. And it's the truth, isn't it? There are things in our own hearts that we have to take a little broom and sweep out. There are things that have been planted in our consciousness, in our mental and intellectual awareness that don't belong there. And they are things that categorize people, label people, other people, and we don't need them. We don't need them. And once you recognize you don't need them anymore, they won't be there. So for the young people in this room, I am so inspired by all the things I have heard today and the things that you haven't said to me that you will do because of your open-mindedness, your youthfulness, and your awareness that it is possible to make revolution simultaneously in ourselves and in society. And revolution is defined as something that is a complete turn. It isn't what the FBI says it is. So I think it is time for us to call it an evening. Was there anybody who needed to say something or they'll walk out pissed off? You won't be pissed off, but you need to say something?
Yeah, I just want to thank you for this. Like, I came here expecting not anything bad, but like keynote, usually a 20-minute speech, and then Q&A. So this is kind of like you're talking about circles and intersections. So it's multi-directional. It's an exchange. So I think that was important to hear everybody speak. So thank you for that.
Thank you all very much.
Hold on 1 minute, we're going to close. We warmed the space and now we want to cool off the space before you go.
So we just wanted to thank everyone again for coming out for this very special and rare event. And also we would like to go. I'm sorry. And then we would just like to thank the student council over here. And everyone who came out to support our event, and we hope to have more events like this in the future and next year for National Public Health Week. And yeah, that's it. I hope everybody gets home safe. Have a good night. Be well.